Imagine 240 missiles in the air at the same time. Not one strike package. Not a surgical raid. 240 separate seeker heads, each locked onto a different point on the same formation of ships, each arriving from a different altitude and bearing, the whole swarm timed to land inside a window of 90 seconds. That is the scenario the US Navy has chosen to rehearse. Not because it is the most likely opening move in any future Pacific conflict, but because if you can train the kill chain against that, you can train it against anything. This is Exercise Valiant Shield, a live, documented, U.S. Pacific Fleet exercise running in various forms since 2006, and in its most recent configurations, the most complex integrated air and missile defense drill the Navy conducts in peacetime. 2 carrier strike groups, multiple Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and cruisers running their Aegis combat systems at the same time. E-2D advanced Hawkeye aircraft overhead stitching the radar picture together. F/A-18 Super Hornets and F-35C Lightning IIs pre-positioned above the threat axis, and a scripted wave of simulated anti-ship missiles, surrogates for the kind of salvo a DF-26 battery could put into the air over the Western Pacific on very short notice. By the end of this breakdown, you will understand exactly how the layered defense works, which system fires first, which fires second, how many interceptors go against each incoming track, and how the math is either on the Navy's side or uncomfortably close to not being. The honest answer is, it depends. And the people who know that best are the ones running the exercise. Start with the threat, because the threat is the reason everything else exists. The DF-26 is a Chinese intermediate-range ballistic missile with a maneuvering warhead. Its declared range bracket runs from roughly 3,000 to 5,000 kilometers. That bracket covers virtually every major U.S. naval operating area in the Western Pacific. The Philippine Sea, the South China Sea, the area west of Guam where a carrier strike group would most likely be positioned during a Taiwan contingency. The PLA rocket force publicly described the DF-26 as a weapon specifically designed to hold U.S. carriers at risk. The nickname in Chinese military publications is not subtle. They call it the Carrier Terminator. A single DF-26 is a serious problem. A salvo of DF-26S, or a mixed volley combining DF-26 rounds with DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missiles and YJ-18 subsonic cruise missiles arriving from different vectors and altitudes. That is a categorically different problem. Not a targeting problem, a mathematics problem. You have a finite number of interceptors aboard each ship. You have a finite number of fire control channels manageable at once. And the incoming missiles are not arriving one at a time. They come in a coordinated, time-compressed, multi-axis salvo designed to exhaust the magazine and saturate the engagement envelope before the last wave hits. That is what Valiant Shield rehearses against. Not a historical threat, not a theoretical one. A threat that the PLA rocket force has publicly invested billions of dollars into developing and which has been flight tested repeatedly over the past decade. What surprises most people about how the Navy approaches this problem isn't the hardware, it's the architecture. The individual systems are impressive, but the real capability is in how they are networked and sequenced, because the defense only works if every handoff happens without hesitation. You cannot build that reflexive coordination in a crisis. You have to drill it until it is automatic. Walk the kill chain from the outside in, starting with detection, because nothing else happens until someone sees the threat first. The outermost sensor layer in a carrier strike group is the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye, a twin turboprop aircraft with a rotodome housing and AN/APY-9 UHF radar. It flies at altitude above the formation, typically between 15 and 25,000 feet, and sees in a dome-shaped volume extending several hundred miles in every direction. The E-2D's job is not to shoot anything down. Its job is track management. It sees the threat before the ships do, builds the track picture, assigns IDs to each incoming contact, and feeds that data down to the Aegis ships through the Cooperative Engagement Capability Network. This is the moment most people miss when they think about missile defense. The intercept itself. The SM-6 climbing out of its MiG-41 vertical launch cell and destroying an incoming warhead. That is the visible part. But the intercept is only possible because an E-2D crew 200 miles away made a classification call correctly, assigned the right track ID, and got the data to the right ship's fire control system before the engagement window opened. If any of those steps are late, wrong, or interrupted by electronic jamming, the whole chain fails downstream. That is why Valiant Shield rehearses the sensor layer as hard as it rehearses the shooters. The exercise doesn't just test whether the SM-6 can hit an inbound target. It tests whether the E-2D can build and maintain track continuity on 40, 50, 60 simultaneous contacts while being notionally jammed, while aircraft are operating in the battle space, while the formation is maneuvering. The human cognitive load inside that E-2D is extraordinary. Put yourself in the mission commander's seat for a moment. You have a radar picture showing dozens of tracks inbound from the northwest. Your job is to sort them by threat priority. Identify which are the high-altitude ballistic threats, which are the sea-skimming cruise missiles coming in below radar horizon, which are potential decoys. And you have to do this in real time, while range collapses at Mach 5 or better for the ballistic tracks. What you do in those first 3 minutes determines whether the ships below you have time to set up their engagements or get caught reacting instead of acting. Here's the complication that changes everything. In a real high-end saturation raid, the attacking force doesn't just fire missiles. It fires missiles with a simultaneous electronic warfare package. Jammers, decoys, frequency-agile radar spoofing. The whole point is to degrade the E-2D's track picture at the exact moment it is most needed. Valiant Shield dedicates significant exercise time to EA-18G Growler, electronic attack aircraft playing the adversary role, jamming their own fleet sensors to test how the defense holds up when the information picture deteriorates. The findings from those sessions are classified. But the fact that the exercise runs this scenario at all tells you something about how the Navy assesses the threat. Now, the tracks are on the Aegis picture. The Aegis combat system is the backbone of everything that follows. Aegis is not a single piece of hardware. It is an integrated weapons system combining the AN/SPY-1 phased array radar, or the newer AN/SPY-6 in the Flight 3 Arleigh Burke destroyers, with fire control computers, a vertical launch system, and the command and decision software that ties them together. The SPY radar is a passive electronically scanned array. It can track hundreds of targets simultaneously, maintain continuous fire control solutions on dozens of them, and sequence intercept launches without the operator manually aiming at each target. An automated kill machine with a human in the loop to authorize the shot. In a carrier strike group configured for Valiant Shield, you typically have 4 to 6 Aegis ships operating as a screen around the carriers. Each ship runs its own Aegis system, but under cooperative engagement capability, they share sensor data in real time. That means a destroyer on the eastern edge of the formation can receive a fire control quality track from the SPY radar on the western edge, and engage a missile that its own radar might not even see yet. The engagement reach of the screen exceeds the sum of its parts. The outer intercept layer is the SM-6, Standard Missile 6, a long-range surface-to-air missile with active radar homing in the terminal phase. Its unclassified engagement range extends beyond 130 nautical miles. Critically, the SM-6 can engage both ballistic and aerodynamic threats, meaning it can hit an inbound DF-26 warhead on its descent trajectory, or a cruise missile flying at wave-top altitude, depending on configuration. In a saturation scenario, SM-6 is the first interceptor off the rail, going after the highest speed, highest priority tracks at maximum range, trying to thin the incoming wave before it gets close enough to require shorter range systems. The mathematics here are brutal and need to be stated plainly. A single Arleigh Burke-class destroyer carries approximately 96 MiG-41 vertical launch cells. Not all of those are loaded with SM-6. The loadout includes Tomahawk cruise missiles, SM-2 interceptors, and ASROC anti-submarine rounds, depending on the mission. A realistic SM-6 load on a single destroyer might be in the range of 20 to 30 missiles. Against a 40-missile salvo aimed at the formation, a single destroyer is not enough. This is precisely why the exercise runs multiple Aegis ships and why cooperative engagement. One ship shooting another ship's track is not a nice-to-have capability. It is the only way the math works. One detail that kept surfacing in the open-source exercise reporting: the hardest problem in a multi-ship cooperative engagement is not the technology. The technology works. The hardest problem is deconfliction, making sure two ships don't shoot separate interceptors at the same incoming track while a different track goes unengaged. In the heat of a real saturation event, with dozens of tracks inbound and fire control officers on multiple ships reacting simultaneously, deconfliction failures are how missiles get through. Valiant Shield drills this explicitly. Some exercise scenarios present the deconfliction problem specifically. Tracks arriving in pairs, spaced close enough to be read as one contact or two, designed to trick fire control teams into double shooting or missing. The evaluation criteria aren't just interceptor hits. They're process discipline under pressure. The outer SM-6 layer does its job. The incoming wave is attenuated. Not stopped, attenuated. Some percentage of the initial volley has been engaged and destroyed. But in a well-designed saturation attack, enough of the volley survives the outer layer to reach the mid-range threat corridor. Now the second layer activates. The Evolved Sea Sparrow Missile, ESSM, is the mid-layer interceptor. Where SM-6 hunts targets at 50, 80, 100 miles, ESSM is designed for the inner defense zone, roughly 10 nautical miles in closing. It is a fast, highly maneuverable missile built for the terminal threat environment where the incoming round is close, fast, and potentially jinking. Each MiG-41 cell can carry 4 ESSM rounds in a quad-pack configuration, which means magazine capacity for close-range defense is substantially higher than the SM-6 layer. A destroyer with a full ESSM load has real depth in the terminal engagement zone. The scenario ESSM is built for is the sea skimmer problem. A ballistic missile has a predictable trajectory. It comes in high and fast on a descending arc. But a YJ-18 cruise missile, or a supersonic sea skimming round, flies at extremely low altitude in the terminal phase, sometimes barely above the wave tops. This puts it below the horizon of the ship's own radar until it is dangerously close. The E-2D overhead is supposed to hand off the track before the ship's own sensors acquire it. But if that handoff is late, if the jam environment has degraded the data link, if there is a geometry problem that puts the track in a radar shadow, then ESSM is engaging with very little warning and very little margin. That is an ESSM crew firing on a target that might be 2 minutes away from impact. This is where the exercise becomes most acute. In multiple reported iterations of Valiant Shield, evaluation teams have injected communications, degradation scenarios mid-exercise, simulated link failures between the E-2D and the surface ships, designed to test whether the Aegis crews can maintain independent fire control without the overhead track picture. The answer, according to the Navy's own after-action summaries, is yes, but with a significant reduction in engagement lead time. The ships can fight without the E-2D. They fight worse. The lead time lost when the overhead sensor goes down is measured in tens of seconds. In a saturation scenario, tens of seconds is the margin between engaging a threat at a tactically comfortable range and engaging it at knife fight range with ESSM and whatever else is available. Which brings us to the last line. The Phalanx close-in weapon system is a 20 mm 61 Vulcan Gatling cannon mounted on a self-contained radar and fire control pedestal. It fires at approximately 4,500 rounds per minute. Its engagement range is roughly 2 kilometers. At that range, against a missile traveling at Mach 2 or better, the engagement window is measured in seconds, single-digit seconds. Phalanx is not a system you want to use. It means everything above it in the kill chain has failed to stop this particular incoming round, and the only thing standing between that warhead and the ship is a rotating barrel that will put roughly 5,000 rounds into the air in the time it takes you to say the word firing. Here's the part that seems counterintuitive. The Navy runs CIWS engagement exercises not because they expect CIWS to be the primary line of defense, but because they expect it to be used. In a real large-scale saturation attack against a carrier strike group, the working assumption is that some rounds will survive the outer and middle layers. The SM-6 layer will not achieve a 100% intercept rate. The ESSM layer will not achieve a 100% intercept rate. CIWS is the system that catches what the rest missed. The entire design philosophy of layered defense rests on the assumption that no single layer is perfect, and that defense in depth produces an acceptable aggregate intercept rate across the whole volley. The target is not to stop every missile. The target is to stop enough missiles to preserve the force's ability to fight. What's notable about how the Navy designs and executes Valiant Shield is this. The exercise is not built to produce good-looking numbers. It is specifically designed to find the failure modes. The scenario where deconfliction breaks down, where the link goes down at the wrong moment, where CIWS is forced to engage because everything above it leaked. The after-action reports that come out of Valiant Shield are not victory laps. They are engineering documents about where the kill chain failed and what needs to be fixed before the next iteration. That intellectual honesty is the actual capability. Any Navy can run an exercise it knows how to win. The exercise that matters is the one you design to find where you lose. Now, the F/A-18 Super Hornet layer, because aircraft get underweighted in almost every discussion of missile defense. In a carrier strike group operating in exercise or in conflict, the air wing is not just sitting above the formation watching the Aegis ships work. The Super Hornets and the F-35Cs are part of the kill chain in a specific and important way. They are the forward layer supposed to find and destroy the launch platforms before those platforms fire. The DF-26 is road mobile. It operates from transporter erector launchers that move around, set up, shoot, and move again. The time-sensitive targeting problem? Finding those TLs and destroying them before they complete their launch sequence is one of the hardest problems in modern warfare. The F-35C's primary contribution here is not its weapons load, though that matters. It is its sensor suite. Running in low observable mode with its AN/APG 81 AESA radar and the distributed aperture system, the F-35C can gather targeting quality data on emitting threats at ranges and in electromagnetic environments where an F/A-18 Super Hornet would have difficulty operating. In the exercise construct, F-35Cs run forward as sensor nodes, feeding targeting data back to the carrier strike group to enable strikes before the threat launches. This is the piece of Valiant Shield that gets the least public attention and arguably matters most strategically. If you can find the TLs and destroy them in the pre-launch phase, the saturation problem never materializes. You have eliminated the incoming volley before it exists. The SM-6, ESSM, and CIWS layers are the last resort. The F-35C and Super Hornet Force is the first choice. The honest caveat is that this is also the hardest problem. Road mobile ballistic missile systems are specifically designed to complicate time-sensitive targeting. The PLA has invested heavily in camouflage, concealment, and deception for its TEL force. The launch cycle from drive-up to launch for a DF-26 unit is assessed to be relatively short. Short enough that the window for finding and striking the launcher before it fires may be very narrow or may not exist at all if the first indication of an attack is missiles already airborne, which is why the surface defense layers exist, which is why Valiant Shield rehearses both. Here is the uncomfortable question the exercise forces planners to confront. What happens if the F/A-18 and F-35 counterforce strike succeeds against 30% of the TLs? The SM-6 layer intercepts 60% of what was launched. The ESSM catches 75% of what got through SM-6, and CIWS engages everything that reaches its envelope. And the math still says something hits the carrier? That is not a failure of any individual system. That is the arithmetic of saturation. And it is exactly what the exercise is designed to quantify. Be precise about the limits, because precision is more honest than vagueness. The US Navy has not publicly disclosed the intercept rates achieved in Valiant Shield exercises against the highest fidelity threat surrogates. The classified performance data for SM-6 against maneuvering reentry vehicle targets, and for ESSM against low-altitude, high-speed threats in a heavy jam environment, that lives in documents that will not be declassified anytime soon. What is publicly available from the Navy's own reporting and from congressional testimony is this. The integrated layered defense works as advertised against the threat envelopes it was designed and tested for. It has been validated in live fire exercises. The systems individually have demonstrated strong intercept performance in controlled conditions. What has not been publicly validated is performance against a genuine, full-scale, coordinated, multi-axis saturation volley of the scale the PLA rocket force could actually put into the air. Because you cannot test that. The nearest real-world analog available to US planners is the performance of Iron Dome and David's Sling against large rocket and missile barrages in the Middle East. And the physics of that threat environment are substantially different from a Pacific anti-carrier saturation scenario. Nobody knows exactly where the break-even point is. The Navy's job is to push that break-even point as high as possible through system investment and training. Valiant Shield is part of that work. Most people assume that the bigger the exercise, the more confident the Navy is in its defense. The evidence tells a different story. The Navy has been consistently expanding the scale and complexity of Valiant Shield. More ships, harder scenarios, more adversary injection. Because the threat has been growing faster than the defense in some dimensions. The DF-26 exists. It is deployable. The numbers are real. The exercise scale reflects the seriousness of the problem, not confidence that the problem is solved. Now, the question that everyone in the strategic community has been arguing about since the first DF-21D test footage surfaced. Does Valiant Shield make the fleet more capable, or does it make the fleet more visible? Can a massive multi-carrier exercise in the Pacific simultaneously sharpen the force and serve as a deterrent signal, or does the signal undermine the sharpening? Here's a take that will probably get some pushback. The deterrent signaling function of Valiant Shield may be its most important output, not the training metrics. A two-carrier exercise in the Philippine Sea, conducted on a publicized schedule, with imagery released through official channels showing F/A-18 Super Hornets on deck and Arleigh Burke destroyers in formation. That is a deliberate communication to Beijing. It says, we have practiced this. We are confident enough in our kill chain to show you we are practicing it. The implicit message is capability, not weakness. The counter-argument is that signaling capabilities also signals limitations. If the PLA analyzes the exercise carefully enough, and they do, they can model the magazine depth of the Aegis ships, estimate the interceptor-to-threat ratios, and design their saturation attack to fall just outside the demonstrated envelope. The exercise that makes the fleet more capable also makes it more legible to the adversary. Both things can be true simultaneously. And the Navy knows this. The classified portion of Valiant Shield, the scenarios, the intercept rates, the deconfliction protocols, is classified for exactly this reason. What is shown publicly is the existence of the capability, the confidence to train for it, and the will to rehearse the hardest scenarios. What is not shown is the precise architecture of the kill chain, the specific trigger points for each engagement handoff, the exact intercept performance of each layer. This balance between demonstration and concealment is probably correct, and critics who argue that open exercises give away too much are underweighting the value of deterrence through demonstrated readiness. The PLA already knows the US has SM-6 and ESSM and Phalanx CIWS aboard its Aegis ships. The technical specifications are not secret. What a potential adversary has less visibility into is whether the humans in the kill chain can execute the handoffs under pressure in a real saturation environment. That is the muscle memory question, and muscle memory does not appear in a technical specification. It only appears when the drill is run. Walk through the decisive minutes one more time, from first detection to last-ditch engagement, as the exercise sequences them. T-minus 22 minutes. The E-2 Advanced Hawkeye, operating 150 miles north of the formation, acquires a cluster of anomalous tracks on its AN/APY-9 radar. They are above the horizon for an aircraft at its altitude in a way they would not be for a surface ship. Classification takes approximately 90 seconds. Tracks are designated as probable ballistic threat. High altitude, high speed, descending trajectories consistent with a DF-26 class reentry body. The track picture begins feeding to the Aegis ships via cooperative engagement capability. At the same moment, EA-18G growlers in the exercise inject simulated jamming across the data link frequencies. The Aegis ships acquire tracks on their own SPY radars approximately 4 minutes later. By this point, the CEC track picture has already assigned engagement priorities. The fire control officers aboard the lead Arleigh Burke destroyer confirm track correlation and begin sequencing SM-6 launch solutions. The MiG-41 cells on the forward part of the ship cycle open. The first SM-6 leaves the rail, then another. Then the ship 2 miles to the west begins its own SM-6 sequence, engaging tracks the first ship cannot reach from its geometry, T-minus 12 minutes. The SM-6 outer layer has engaged the first wave. Intercept calls confirm kills on the highest priority ballistic tracks. The surviving cruise missile tracks are now below the SM-6 engagement altitude and descending toward the sea skimmer regime. ESSM fire control solutions are already built and waiting. The first ESSM quad pack cycle. Close-in engagements begin as surviving tracks enter the 10-mile mark. T-minus 4 minutes. The CEC link the E-2D was using drops out for 40 seconds. The exercise team injects the communications degradation. The Aegis crews shift to autonomous fire control. Engagement priority falls to the ship's own SPY radars. The lead time advantage from the overhead sensor is gone. The ESSM crews are now engaging tracks at shorter range than they trained for. Every shot counts more. The deconfliction protocols have to work from memory, under time pressure, without the E-2D's track picture to arbitrate. And here's where the microfinal arrives in real time. One track survives the ESSM layer. It survived not because the ESSM missed. The round was double assigned through a deconfliction failure. Both shots went to a different track, and this one leaked through the seam. It is now inside 2 nautical miles in closing. Phalanx CIWS acquires it. The engagement is automatic. The system does not wait for a human to authorize the shot at this range, because at this range there is no time for human authorization. The rotating barrel spins up. The burst fires. The track disappears from the radar picture. That is a successful exercise outcome. But in the after-action debrief, the deconfliction failure that led to the CIWS engagement is the subject of an hour of detailed discussion. Why did 2 ships shoot the same track? What did the fire control team see that caused them to both designate it? Is it a procedure failure, a software labeling failure, or a human cognitive failure under load? The answer to that question determines what changes before the next iteration runs. That is Valiant Shield working exactly as designed. There is one honest caveat that cannot be glossed over, and the Navy would be the first to state it. Valiant Shield runs against scripted threat volleys. The number of incoming tracks, their timing, their trajectories, their electronic warfare characteristics, all of these are planned in advance by the exercise design team. The participants know an attack is coming. They do not know the exact timing or parameters, but they know to be at battle stations. They have preloaded intercept solutions. They have their Aegis systems warmed up and their E-2Ds already airborne. In a real conflict, the opening of a DF-26 salvo would likely be preceded by a period of strategic ambiguity, elevated tension, and potential intelligence indications, but not certainty. The carrier strike group commander might be at elevated readiness, but might not be at full battle stations when the first tracks appear. The Aegis ships might be in a posture optimized for the last 12 hours of operations, not for an immediate mass raid. The E-2D might be between rotations. Phalanx might be in standby. These are not failures of the system. They are the inherent friction of real operations versus a managed exercise environment. The gap between exercise performance and real-world performance under true surprise conditions is a known and studied problem in all military operations. The U.S. Navy takes it seriously. The answer the Navy has developed is not to close that gap through intelligence certainty. You cannot guarantee intelligence certainty, but to reduce readiness transition time. The time it takes a carrier strike group to go from normal steaming posture to full battle stations has been a subject of serious investment and repeated drill. The goal is to make that transition fast enough that even under near-surprise conditions, the kill chain is operational before the first wave reaches SM-6 range. Whether that goal is achieved in all conceivable scenarios is the question that the classified portions of Valiant Shield address, and which will remain classified. Going through the public record on Valiant Shield iterations, one detail kept surfacing. The exercise has a recurring tension built into its structure that reflects a real strategic tension in U.S. Pacific policy. The tension is this. The exercise trains for a scenario where U.S. carrier strike groups are operating within range of DF-26 fire, within the threat envelope. Inside the A2/AD bubble, the PLA has specifically built to deny access to the Western Pacific littorals. But there is a legitimate question among U.S. military planners about whether carriers should be operating in that zone at all in a high-end conflict. Whether the correct answer is to keep carriers further back and let land-based aircraft and submarines carry the offensive load in the inner zone, while carriers operate from outside the ballistic missile threat range. The Navy's public answer is that carriers must be able to operate inside that zone to project power effectively and to maintain alliance credibility with partners like Japan, the Philippines, and Taiwan who are inside that zone, whether they choose to be or not. You cannot credibly promise to defend an ally by promising to stay 500 miles away from them. The carrier must be able to go where the threat is. That is the strategic logic that makes the Valiant Shield training program necessary rather than optional. But here's what this tells us about the broader deterrence equation. The exercise is simultaneously a capability demonstration and a commitment signal. When two carrier strike groups conduct a missile defense drill in the Philippine Sea, they are not just training the kill chain. They are telling the PLA that U.S. carriers intend to operate in the contested zone, that they have practiced defending themselves in that zone, and that the calculation that U.S. carriers would retreat under threat of DF-26 fire may not be as reliable as PLA planning might assume. The training and the deterrence are not separate products of the exercise. They are the same product, delivered simultaneously to two audiences: the crews themselves and the strategic competitor watching from satellites and signals intelligence platforms. Does it work? Deterrence is held in the Pacific. There has been no kinetic confrontation between U.S. carrier groups and PLA forces in the Western Pacific. Whether that is because of exercises like Valiant Shield, or despite the competitive dynamics that make such exercises necessary, or simply because neither side has yet faced a trigger that overcame the deterrence threshold. Historians will argue about that for decades. What is not arguable is the direction of investment. The U.S. Navy has commissioned the Flight III Arleigh Burke destroyers specifically to replace the AN/SPY-1 radar with the AN/SPY-6 air and missile defense radar. The SPY-6 has significantly greater sensitivity and discrimination capability than its predecessor, meaning it can see smaller, faster, and more maneuverable targets, including the kinds of maneuvering reentry vehicles the DF-26 carries. That is not a general-purpose upgrade. That is a purpose-built response to the specific threat the PLA has fielded. The SM-6 has been through multiple block upgrades, extending its range and expanding its engagement envelope against ballistic threats. The Navy has been public about developing a hypersonic intercept capability to address the emerging generation of Chinese hypersonic glide vehicles, a threat category the current SM-6 was not originally designed to engage. The pace of investment in the Aegis upgrade cycle has accelerated in direct proportion to the pace of PLA rocket force development. That is not coincidence. It is the procurement record of a Navy that takes the threat seriously and is allocating resources to close the capability gaps that exercises like Valiant Shield identify. The F-35C's integration into the carrier air wing as a sensor node rather than just a strike platform has matured significantly over the past several years. The concept of the F-35C functioning as a forward-deployed data gatherer, pushing targeting quality tracks back to SM-6 shooters against threats the SM-6 ships cannot directly see, has been exercised and refined. The Valiant Shield iterations have incorporated F-35Cs in progressively more complex roles over successive years. This is the kill chain maturing in real time through repetition. Will you notice the signs in the exercise record that something has shifted? Comment below. Are the increasing exercise scales a sign of confidence or a sign of urgency? Because the answer to that question changes what the exercise means strategically. The fleet that shows up to Valiant Shield is not the fleet from 10 years ago. The threat it is rehearsing against is not the threat from 10 years ago either. Both sides of the equation are developing simultaneously, which is exactly what makes the Western Pacific the most consequential naval theater on the planet right now. Here's what the exercise ultimately proves. Layered missile defense is not a product. It is a process. The hardware. The SM-6, the ESSM, the Phalanx CIWS, the Arleigh Burke destroyers, the E-2 Hawkeye overhead. All of that exists and all of it works. But the capability that PLA planning has to account for is not the hardware on the specifications page. It is the muscle memory of the fire control teams who have executed that kill chain under the hardest simulated conditions the Navy can design. It is the deconfliction protocols corrected through after-action review until the seams are closed. It is the E-2D crews who have practiced maintaining track continuity while being jammed, and who know what to do when the link degrades, because they have done it before. That is what Valiant Shield builds, and that is what makes it worth watching closely. The open question, worth leaving in the comments, is this. Given that the PLA can watch every major US naval exercise from orbit and from signals intelligence platforms, does a large public exercise like Valiant Shield mostly sharpen the fleet, mostly signal to Beijing, or does it have to do both simultaneously to justify the resources it consumes? There is no clean answer. But the framing of the question tells you what the stakes are. If you want to understand how the F-35C changes the kill chain from the inside, how a fifth-generation jet functions as a sensor node that transforms what the Aegis ships can see and shoot, that breakdown is next. Stay with us.